Anything you noticed about Foundation? Any thoughts, differences from Bootstrap, whatever? No? Cool. Uh, Someone else. Yeah, Walter.
At first glance, I think the difference between the fonts and the button style, those just sort of stand out at first because it's the first things you see when you change the site from like Bootstrap to Foundation.
I like how the fonts are like big and square and blue on here. Oh, and they're animated too. I didn't notice that. What else? Yeah, Justin.
What we were talking about with Bootstrap's redundancy in class names, Foundation didn't have, so you had button ones and you just had a large text.
Yeah. So if I go to the buttons page, actually, I have some on here. So if I go and look at, say, this button in comments in Atom, this is a comment. So now I actually do have just class tiny. It's not button tiny the way it would be in Bootstrap. It's tiny, radius, and alert. These are just 3 classes just sort of hanging out there. Anything else? Like personally, I feel like Foundation is sort of pops more. I mean, I feel like it uses brighter colors and it has more contrast. And when you think about its purpose, that makes sense. So Foundation is a mobile-first design framework. Bootstrap is more sort of desktop-first, whereas Foundation is mobile-first. And so if you think about that, then having these really big, bold buttons with like very few edges and lines, that makes sense. If you're looking at a mobile phone, it's a really small screen. There are probably other distractions around you. You might have like sunlight shining on it, so your screen is going to be hard to read. And so using really bright, poppy things, that makes sense. So this is the sort of nuanced difference between mobile design and web design, or one of them anyway. And you can see that sort of mobile-ness throughout here, on here. Let's see. Also, like looking back at the code, this bacon pancakes is actually really funny, but we're not going to watch that right now. Looking back at here, so this is all of the HTML I had to write, like these, 16 lines? I had to write 16 lines of HTML in order to make this menu bar. That doesn't even include this form. Excluding that form, I had to write 16 lines of HTML just for this bar across here, just for those like 2 buttons. So Foundation is much more framework-like than Bootstrap was. Bootstrap was more sort of library-ish. Bootstrap was more forgiving. Whereas Foundation is less forgiving. Foundation requires you to be more explicit in what you're doing. Foundation says, hey, man, you can't just have your own tiny class or your own radius class. I have one, and if you start trying to do anything with a class called tiny, then you might break your entire site and it won't look good anymore. So Foundation is much more about you inserting your code into Foundation rather than the other way around. Thinking about its name, I guess that sort of makes sense too. I don't know. But why would you want to use such a rigid framework? I mean, what advantages are there from using something so rigid? Like, why not just use something sort of flexible, like Bootstrap? I'm talking about like the rigidity itself. Like, what's nice about that rigidness? John?
Pushing you in certain directions.
It's pushing you in a certain direction, yeah. And like in sort of a 1984-esque way, like with that whole, freedom through obedience or whatever, it's kind of the same thing when you're using web frameworks that require you to write your code in a specific way. They take a lot of the guesswork and a lot of the decision-making out of the process of making a website. And not having to worry about that is actually really nice in a lot of ways. So even though in some ways it seems kind of clunky that you have to write 16 lines of HTML just to make a navigation bar, knowing that if I follow these specific instructions to the letter, I'll get a very specific result, there's something sort of comforting in that. There's something like I know what my end result is going to be. And I know that Foundation has taken care of this for me. One other thing to note between Foundation and Bootstrap, aside from the more explicitness of its code up here, and the fact that they ask us to include normalize as well, is you have to include some JavaScript with Foundation as well. So in every Foundation page, you need to have this in there in order for most of the Foundation modals and things to work. So you can tell the things that require that by going back over here. Anything that has a JS tag requires that document.foundation thing in order to work. So to show what would happen if we took that off, this is all running on JavaScript. If I refresh that, let me go back to this. Am I in the right branch now? Yeah, okay. So if I get rid of this and refresh the page, that still works. Stop working. There we go. No? Oh man, come on. Throw me a bone here. Oh wait, maybe that wasn't it. No. I don't know. My browser probably has it cached or something. At any rate, this should not be working, so just humor me and imagine it isn't. So when I was putting together this version of Grumbler, this thing was driving me crazy because I couldn't figure out where to put it. I knew that I had to have a line of JavaScript, so I started off by going into app.js and putting it right here, and that didn't change anything. And so it took me a long time to realize that I have to put it inside document.ready. That's because this Foundation thing can't start until your web page is fully loaded. Then it can start doing its thing. So when you're including document Foundation, either put it inside your document ready, or if you're feeling fancy like me and you only want to touch the HTML in this repo, you can just add it at the bottom inside script tags like this, down at the very bottom of your page after everything else is loaded. Any questions about that? Cool. So, like Bootstrap, Foundation uses 12 columns, and whereas Bootstrap had you do stuff like col, mid, 9, Foundation takes a slightly different approach where you write things out like this. You can write small 9 columns or column. There's literally no difference. It's just which one you prefer grammatically. So I guess if I wanted to do small 1, I would probably do column instead of columns, but it really doesn't make any difference at all. And also, like Bootstrap, it has a lot of kind of goofy words. So we're going to do Foundation scavenger, Foundation hunt. I can't think of one for that. So let me write out the goofy things that Foundation has. All right, so go ahead and take 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes with your table partner to figure out what these are. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll run through them in 5 minutes.